how partying can make you a great speaker and storyteller. One way to look at parties is a playground for your storytelling. We obviously all go to parties to socialize. You can test out your stories with friends, people you know, acquaintances, and even strangers. So not only you will find out if your stories are good, you will also find out if you're great at telling them. All this while sharpening and honing your ability to speak. This is the case because if you don't tell your stories well enough and the way that you tell them is not good enough, then people will lose interest and stop listening to you, or even someone else will take over. Even though people rarely admit that they're not interested in what you are saying because they're polite, you can definitely read that from their body language. At parties, this conversation is not usually a professional interaction, which basically means that it's not their job to listen to what you have to say. So most people don't or won't want to if it's not worth listening to. Parties also are a perfect place to practice knowing your audience, because there's different types of people who you talk to about a certain subject. Some just want to laugh, which is usually the case because people go to parties to relax, or else they probably won't be interested. I'm talking about the people who don't really care about the subject, but they might care about or find it entertaining how you present it. This is something that I believe a lot of us think about in our minds, but don't really say it. You will also come across some people who are actually interested in your subject. Well, obviously, if you're at a party full of people with shared interests, if they're from the office, then probably they will be interested in some of the stories you have to say about that subject. In these situations, you can really experiment with your stories and try to make them more educational, add some details to it so they could comment on it, and boom, maybe you have a subject now that you could talk about after this. You'll also come across some people who are tired, or maybe they just don't care of what you have to say regardless of what it is you want to say. You will usually feel rejection out of these people. Don't let it bring you down. Feel empathetic. Think about how you would be in their situation. Like I said, maybe they're tired, or maybe this is the time you can actually really experiment and test out your ability to storytell. Because if you can get these types of people entertained, you can get pretty much anyone entertained with your stories. That is a good indicator that you are a good storyteller. Also, another part of learning your audience, and this may also be an intellectual exercise for you, you may have to change your vocabulary while speaking to your audience. Because obviously, the most important thing is that they understand it. Of course, if they care to understand. So if you're talking about a specific subject that you have delved deep into, and your story involves these complex terms that only people within that hobby understand, then it's definitely way better to replace those terms with words that explain those terms simply, if that makes sense. Also, definitely remember that parties are a great place to collect stories from, whether it's actually experiencing something within that party, something funny happens, something crazy, something emotional, or it's something that other people have said, their stories, or maybe you've told your story and then others have some comments on it, something they've experienced similar to that. So then you can build that story to your story, and it just makes your story more juicy because it's filled with content and something that makes your stories more worthwhile listening to. So all of these skills that you can learn at parties to become an effective speaker, you can also obviously apply to being on stage, learning your audience. You have to learn to read them. This is like a playing ground, of course, at a much smaller scale, but it still is good practice. A lot of people are starting their YouTube channels. Stories make everything more interesting. I think you can agree with me. Final thing to consider for this to work, you can't be drunk, obviously. You can't be hammered. To tell stories, you have to be able to talk. That makes sense, doesn't it? To end this video off, I will tell you a story about a joke that I do at parties. I've done it multiple times. No one's ever found it funny. I find it hilarious. So imagine this. It's the highlight of the party. People are having fun. Good music is playing. And what I do at those points, if I feel like it is, I go find the aux cord and I put on an audiobook. This video is not sponsored by Audible, but it should have been when I did that at parties because wow. People were so disappointed. I told them, wait for the beat drop. Of course, never came. It was an audiobook. Usually my go-to audiobook is The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F. Let's keep it family friendly. The book is by Mark Manson. I think it's a great book. I've read it 3 times now. Other people don't really seem to enjoy it at parties that much though. Maybe I have to change it to a different audiobook.